In this tutorial, we're going to look at lots of different ways that we can create models from the vectors that we created in the previous session. We're going to look at assembling the part to create a 48-inch molding and then bend that molding into an arch. To get started, we're going to open up a new instance of our software. Now we're going to load in the file that we created in our last Lily molding project. That's where we created all the vectors that we need to create the 3D components for the molding. So we're going to go to Open Existing File, navigate over to that tutorial folder, and choose the Lily Leaf Molding Drawing.crv file, and we'll just click Open. Now, as always, it's a good idea before you start to create any 3D content to look for some specific things in your job setup so that you're going to get the best results possible. So let's go over to our job setup here and click that. And all of this is okay. We're going to make sure that we did leave the datum set to the center. It just makes it a little bit easier to visualize what you're modeling. But at the very bottom are the two that we want to pay attention to. First of all, our modeling resolution is the one thing that we need to make sure is set right in our job setup, or if we don't realize it, we may end up creating components that don't look all that great for no other reason than we didn't have enough pixels to create nice, smooth components. So for right now, it's set to standard, which is the fastest, and that gives us 1 million points distributed within inside of our model. If we drop down this dialog, you'll see that there's two more settings. There's high, which gives us 2 million points, and then there's very high, which gives us 4 million points. When I like to model stuff like this, I always try to choose the most amount of points I can have. So we're going to leave it at very high. And we're also going to make sure that we check our material settings so that what we do create will look close to what we expect it's going to be in the material that we may use to cut this in. So we're going to click there, and right now it's set to Canadian Maple, which I think is perfect. But if I wanted to change that, I could go ahead and click that drop down and choose whatever I wanted out of this list. But we're going to leave it at Canadian Maple for now. And then we'll just off click that and we'll click OK. The next thing we're going to want to do is tile our views horizontally. So we have our 2D view at the top and our 3D view at the bottom. Because of the orientation of our project, this is probably the best layout for us. And we'll be able to see what's going on with our 3D components as we create them in our 2D view. We'll be able to see the results really quite easily. Now let's have a look at our modeling tab. In our modeling tab, you'll see that we have a level set up for us automatically, which is the default level. It's just blank. And in this case, our first level that we're going to create is going to be the base for our molding, the blank base. So while we're right here, we may as well just right click on level 1 and rename that to base. And this is probably the easiest way to keep a job like this organized, is just to be aware of your level names. Now, if you had watched the drawing video that came before this, you'll know that we had purposely drew a vector here and a vector at the bottom, so the top and the bottom, and those are going to be used as our drive rails to create the base for this project. And then this cross section is what we're going to actually extrude along those two lines, or sweep between those two lines. And to do that, we're going to use our 2 rail sweep option, which is in our modeling tools, the second icon in. We can click that. And starting at the very top of the form, we know we need to actually select 2 rails. So let's just go ahead and select those. So we're going to click the top rail and hold down our shift key and grab the bottom rail. And then we're going to choose Use Selection. Now the software is going to go find the start points for those and indicate them with the green dots, and also give us some arrows here so we know that our direction of flow for both lines is to the right. If it happened to be the wrong way around, you can right click on one of the lines and you can go ahead and reverse that rail direction, but these are fine, so we're going to leave them as is. The next thing I'm going to need to do is actually select my cross section. So we'll just click on that. I'm going to make sure that I don't sweep between spans. Both of these options should be turned off. I'm not going to scale to an exact height. This is going to be an add component, and we are going to call this blank base. And we can click apply. In our 3D view, you'll see that we have a nice piece of blank molding, and we can see at the end of it, that cross section that we drew right here is evident right there on the end of our piece of molding. And that looks really good. So we can just look straight down on that again, and then we can close that 2 rail sweep form. Now that we're happy with our base, we can go ahead now and start focusing on our lily that's going to sit proud of our blank base. Now, because this is a brand new set of components that are all part of the same thing, we should keep it organized, so that requires a brand new level. So let's go over here and right click on the base level and insert a new level. Then we're going to right click on top of that and we're going to rename that level Lily and Stem. And we'll just go ahead and click there to accept that. Now we don't need to see the blank base anymore, so we can turn off the base and let's minimize. So the first thing we're going to do with our lily is we're going to create our leaf shapes that we're going to use. So like we saw in the last tutorial, we created these two closed vectors and then we copied this vector and created this. So we're going to have this background leaf with this slight recess in it, and then we're going to have a nice proud front leaf here. And we're going to do that just by using our shape editing tools. So let's bring that up and we're going to create this back leaf first. It's going to be a dome profile. Now we can choose whatever angle we would like to have just by sliding this around or typing in a number, and you'll see that it will be drawn in the 3D view, what we expect. But what we're going to do is we're going to change this to be 65 degrees. Press the spacebar to accept that, and you'll see that our 3D component has been updated. We don't want any base height at all. Then we're going to want to scale this to an exact height, and we're going to make that 0.15 and the spacebar to accept that. And you'll see that now we have a shape that's the height that I like it to be. And we're going to go ahead and call this bottom leaf. And then we can go ahead and start a new component. Now this next one, we're going to choose this small leaf section here. It's going to be the same shape profile, the same angle, but we're going to change the base height to be just 0.1. We're going to make this a subtract component, and we're going to call this inner leaf. And we'll click apply. And you'll see that we'll now have that little leaf shape, that dome shape, subtracted away from our original bottom leaf. And that looks exactly like I'd like to see. So let's start another new component. And we're going to choose our top leaf. We're going to use that same dome shape profile at the 65 degrees. We're going to make this 0.15, again, just like the bottom leaf, except we're going to make this a merge component. We want the results to merge into what we already have here, and we're going to call this top leaf. Then we can click apply. And then we can click close. And there we have the result that we were looking for, this interesting looking Art Deco-ish lily leaf. And we'll look back on that again. And now let's have a look at the stem. So to create the stem, we are going to use the Extrude and Weave tool. That's the third icon over in our modeling tools. And if we click that, you'll see that we need to choose a drive rail. Well, this tool is a lot like the 2-rail sweep tool that we just used to make our blank molding, where we need a drive rail or several drive rails and some cross sections. In this case, we're going to choose the one drive rail that we already created. That's the one that is this nice arc here, and that starts to merge into the actual leaf. So we're going to click use selection, and you'll see that much like the 2-rail sweep tool, our software will show you the green start point and give you some arrows to show you the direction of flow of this vector, which is exactly what we want. And now we need to add in some cross sections. Now with this tool, we can add in one cross section if we'd like, or several different cross sections. So we're going to start with one right now. We're going to choose our large cross section, select that, and we'll click on the start point. So we're telling the software we would like to start that cross section here and extrude it all along this line or vector until the very end. I want to point out that you'll see these control handles here that are off of the start point now. This red dot here lines up with this red dot on our cross section. So this end of the cross section will be here, the other end will be over here, and it'll extrude along this way. Also, you'll see that we have some of these gray markings along the drive rail, and that shows you the width and the angle that your cross section will be at these specific locations. And that's really quite helpful, especially when you have more than one different cross section in there. So let's go ahead and add in a second cross section. We're going to click this little guy here and we're going to put him at the end, and you'll see what happens now. If we zoom in on this end point, we now have a yellow handle, and that matches up with the yellow dot here on the end of this smaller cross section. So we have an idea of how things are going to work. Let's just go ahead and move this back into place. Now, one other thing you're going to notice is that these gray lines here are now progressively getting smaller because we're actually extruding from one shape to the other. So they'll start out big, they get smaller all the way down to the end, which this line at the end is exactly the same size as this cross section here, which is kind of nice. So let's have a look at our next section here in our Extrude and Weave form. And we're going to not create square corners. We're going to uncheck sweep between spans. We're not going to use a component. We're not going to worry about weaving under and over. We're not going to scale to an exact height right now. And we're just going to choose to add this component, and we'll call it stem. And we'll click apply. And you'll see what happens. Now we have this nice stem that's been extruded really quite nicely along that curve. I was really quite happy with that curve, so I don't need to make any edits to it. I like the way it's shaped. It has an organic feel to it, and it's really quite nice. I like the height that's there. That looks really good, except for it's a little bit more proud than the height of our leaf here. So let's go ahead and scale to an exact height, and we're going to scale it to the 0.15. That's the same height as the dome is we used to make this leaf with, and so that should be nice and flat. A good sign of a nice bas relief is everything kind of comes up to the same point if possible. That looks really good. Now I like it, except for I think what happens is it needs to be thicker longer, because I think it gets a little bit thin in here. So if I go back and choose this cross section, I can go ahead and drop it on my drive rail anywhere as I would like it to be. So let's just go ahead and click it there and see what change we get. And we'll hit apply. And we'll see that it gets thicker as it goes around. Maybe that's a little bit too thick. So we can just grab that and drag it along our drive rail, and we can place it where we'd like it to be. Maybe a little bit farther back than that. Click apply again. I'm just looking down here, and that looks pretty good right there. And I'm happy with that. Okay, and it's still being scaled to 0.15. Now there's one other little problem that I'm sure you've noticed, is that when the stem runs into our leaf, it actually rises up and follows along all of these contours and looks a bit funny. We can fix that by turning this to a merge component opposed to an add component. So it'll be merged into the result of everything else. And I like that. That looks really quite nice, just like that. So let's go ahead and click close. Now what I'd like to do is I'd like to take this stem and leaf and make a copy of it and make a smaller version that kind of fits right in this area here. So to do that, what I'm going to do is go over to our component tree, and I am going to click the first one here, and I'm going to hold down my shift key, and I'm going to click the last in the list. And because I have my shift key held down, the software will actually select all of the other components that are in between those two. So the result of this is all of the components we just made are now selected. And I can go into my 3D view and I can click them again, and that will bring up my control handle. So what I want to do is I want to make a copy of this. So I'm going to size this down a bit, but while I do that, I'm going to hold down my control key. And when I do that, and I let go, I'm going to get a copy of those components. So let's just make it about that big. And then I'll let go of my mouse pointer and the control key. And you'll see now I have a copy of those. And over here in my component tree, you'll see that we have stem bracket 1 bracket. And that's a copy of the original stem, and so on for the other components. And now I'm just going to move this into place where I want it to be. As I said, I want it to kind of fit in there. Size it down maybe a little bit more. We're going to rotate it a bit. I'd like the interaction between the two of these to be quite nice and fluid. So to do that, I'm going to need to position this so the stem actually merges into that larger stem smoothly. And that just might mean a little bit of playing around here just to kind of get it right. And I don't want the leaf to peek out past my center point. You can see in the 2D view, you can see exactly what's going on there. So I'm probably going to have to make this a little bit smaller. and then rotate it a little bit more just to kind of keep that leaf to the left-hand side of my center point. I'll rotate that a bit more. Maybe something like that might be okay. I'm still not happy with the way it's sort of coming into. There we go. Now we're getting there. Ah, yes, that's perfect. I think I like that just the way it is. That looks really good. And the way it comes in, it seems quite natural that it's actually connecting that way. Let's just change that a bit more. It's one of those very subjective things that you have to have a plan in your head. There we go. That looks pretty nice right there. And that's great. So if we look at our 2D view, I just click everything for a second, and we press F on our keyboard to fit everything to the view that we have here. We can see that the stem now actually runs across the center point. And as I mentioned before, the idea is to create half of this and then mirror it across. And if we do that, we're going to end up having a copy of this sticking out the top and looking kind of funny. So what we do need to do is crop off the piece that we don't need anymore. So the first thing we need to do that is an actual closed vector. So let's go back to our drawing tool, go to our polyline tool, and we're going to draw a vector box or some sort of a box shape around that part of our stem. That looks good. So I'm going to press escape. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select that box and I'll hold down my shift key and I'm going to select the stem, go to my modeling tab, and I'm going to choose this icon right here, which is clear area of selected component inside the selected vector. So if I click that, you'll see what happens. My stem has now been cropped off. Now I don't need that vector anymore, so I can delete that out of there. And everything looks really, really good, I think. Quite happy with that. That's great. Now to finish up our lily and stem detail here, we're going to need to mirror this across the center line and then flip it from bottom to top. And to do that, we should probably group this together into one group of components to make it a little easier to manage. So let's go to our modeling tab and we're going to select the first stem here, hold down our shift key and select the bottom one. Again, everything in between gets selected for me. Right click on that and I can go down to group. Now all of that's grouped up. So what I'm going to do is I am going to rename this. So right click on that and choose rename. And we're going to rename this left leaf group. Okay. Then we can press enter to accept that. And I can just go ahead and minimize that list of components. So now what I want to do is in the 3D view, I can go ahead and select that. And then we're going to go to our Mirror Selected Objects tool in the Transform Objects section of our Modeling tab. And now I get the options that I want to use to flip this over the center. So what I want to do is I want to flip about the job center. I want to create a mirrored copy, and I'm going to flip horizontally. And across we go. Now what I want to do is I want to flip about center of job. I don't want to create a mirrored copy, but I want to flip vertically. And that'll put it right into place where it needs to be. And then I can close this down and I can just click anywhere in the 2D view. And you'll see that we get this nice sort of transition going on here and everything looks really quite nice in the end, I think. And then if you remember back in the drawing tutorial that we did and the way we drew the center here, everything matches up quite nicely. Now we're going to go ahead and select this leaf group. We're going to right click on that and say rename, and we're going to call this right leaf group, and we can delete that out of there and then press enter to accept that. And that's perfect. One last little house cleaning thing we're going to do with our right and left groups here for our leaf is we're going to select both of those holding down our shift key. We're going to right click and we're going to turn that into those into merge components. Where they come together in the center, there could be a couple of pixels that are out of alignment and you may end up having these little spikes that stick up. So having those being merged into each other will totally alleviate that. Let's go ahead now and turn back on our base and see what we have. If you look in the 3D view, you're going to see it's not exactly what we kind of thought it was going to be. The leaf and stem motif that we built for the top of it is actually being added to this shape. So we're seeing the creases of the molding through our relief, and that's not exactly what we want to have. Even if we went and we changed our lily and stem level here to a merge level, that's not going to fix it because our lily and stem now is actually merged inside of this and we can't see it. So we need to turn this back to an add level again. So the best way to deal with this is to actually create a molding, much like we did with the original molding, but make it with a smooth top that's just slightly above what we have here, so that when we add this motif to the top of that, it'll actually flow properly, and then we can crop away the stuff we don't need, and when we merge it in, it will look perfect. So let's go ahead and have a look at that. So let's turn off this base for a second, and let's turn off the lily and stem. We're going to minimize that list of component groups. Right click on that, and we're going to create a new level, and we're going to rename this level Smooth Underlying Shape. So the UL means underlying, and we'll click that. We're going to maximize our 2D view for a second. We're going to go ahead and zoom active view to drawing limits, and then we're going to look at using some of the nodes that are already here to create the shape that we need. So let's go to our drawing tab, choose our polyline tool. We're going to snap to that node there. We're going to snap to that node. We're going to snap to this node, and then we're going to snap to that node, and then we're going to right click to exit out of that. We're going to go into node mode, so we can press N on our keyboard, or we can choose node mode right here, but we're just going to choose N. We're going to hover over top of this line, and we are going to right click, and we're going to turn it into a Bezier. And then we're going to slowly start to shape this. So it's just slightly above these bumps that we have here. And we can zoom in a little bit using our scroll wheel and our sliders here and try our best to get that just slightly above. So that looks really good there. Just scroll on the top here. Let's just go ahead and do the same there. That looks okay. And then we need to look at the center of this. It bows up quite heavily here. So let's insert a node right here. So we're going to right click and choose Insert. And then we can grab that and just pull it back towards there a little bit. Again, we want to get it close, but we don't want it to be underneath or touching. I can use my cursor keys on my keyboard if I'd like to kind of move that in. Let's right click on that, and we're going to make that a smooth point, and then we can go back and mess around a bit with these handles again to get that right. That looks good there. Looks good there. Maybe we can grab this control handle and kind of do this to it a bit. Grab that node and bring it over here a bit farther maybe. Just kind of want to make it look nice and neat. Let's move that in a bit. Grab this handle and do that. I think that looks pretty good. Okay, so let's go with that. So let's press escape on our keyboard, and then we'll press F to fit the screen. Let's tile our views again, and let's take a look at extruding this cross section using those two drive rails to see what we get in the end. So let's go to our modeling tab, choose the two rail sweep option. Holding down our shift key, we're going to grab those two drive rails. We're going to say use selection. We're going to grab this as our cross section, turn off sweep between spans. We're going to add this to our job. And we're going to call this Smooth Underlying Shape. And we'll click apply, and then we'll see what we get. We get this nice kind of shape. Let's close this down. Now what we need to do is we need to get our lily and stem on top of this. So instead of us bringing up those two groups that we have, let's just go ahead and expand the lily and stem level. Turn that on again. Let's turn off our smooth UI shape just for a second. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the option right here that says create a component from the visible model. So whatever is in our composite model, we're going to create a component from. I'm going to choose this level here, And we can go ahead and create that component. And you'll see right away we get a new component here. And if we turn off this and minimize those components, you'll see that we have one solid component here that looks exactly like our leaf and stem. That's great. Let's turn back on our smooth underlying shape and you'll see what we have here. That flows along on top of that quite nicely, and we can look straight down on that. Now let's put back in our base again, and we'll see what happens. Well, it doesn't look like much has happened. If we turn it up on its edge, you will see that the thickness has gotten almost double what it was to begin with. And that's because we are adding this smooth underlying shape to the top of the base. And that's not what we want. We want to merge this one into that base. So let's right click on that, change the combine mode to merge. And there we have it. So the thickness is right, but still, because we drew this cross section so that it covers up all of this nice molding, we can't see our molding because it's being merged inside of that. So what are we going to do? Well, what we need to do is crop away the bits of this smooth shape that we don't need. So if we look straight down on this and we select this component, we hold down our shift key and we select the smooth component, we can go up here and we can choose clear area of selected components outside the selected vectors. Well, in this case, it's going to do it outside of the selected component. So let's just go ahead and click that. And if you get this error, then you realize that you've actually selected them in the wrong order. So I'm going to click OK. Let's unselect those. Click our smooth shape first and then the lily and try that again. And we'll get the result that we want. Now, if we hide our base, you'll see what's happened here. We've only kept the bits that were underneath holding up the lily and the stem. So if we hide the lily and stem, you'll see that we have this nice flat shape there. It's not really flat. It follows the same contours as we made with this smooth underlying shape extrusion that we made, or two-rail sweep. That looks really great. So let's put that back on again. Now if we turn back on our base, we're going to see what happens. That actually follows along quite nicely to what we had. And everything looks really quite nice there. I like that a lot. And that's good. Look straight back down on that again. Just off click everything. And if we want to get a really nice view of it, we could go up here and go to view and we could use our shadow shading. And we can see it shaded quite nicely. And that is really quite nice. I like that. Now that we have that finished, let's take this 12-inch section of molding and make a full 48-inch version of it. So to do that, we're going to go up and select all of our vectors we have in our 2D view and move them to a new layer. So we're going up to Edit, and we're going to go down to Selection, and then we're going to select all vectors. Then we can just hover over top of any of those vectors and right click on those and go down to Move to a new layer. And we're going to call this Vectors. And we're going to make it inactive and we're going to make it invisible so we can't see it. And then we'll click OK. So they go away temporarily, but you'll see that up in our layer manager here, we've got the original layer that we were given when we first set up our job. And then we have our vectors layer where we just move those vectors to, and it's not visible. So while we're here, let's rename this layer here Components. That way we can just kind of keep things straight, and we can just off click that and outside of here. Now let's go ahead and edit our job setup. We're going to go to our drawing tab and we're going to choose to set a new job dimension. Now we know that we want our width to be 48 inches, but before we change the width, a little top tip for you is you might want to change your location of your datum first. That way, when we change the width, if we move our datum to the bottom left corner, then our job will actually grow towards the right and our model or all of our components will stay in the bottom left-hand corner. If you don't do that, then your components will stay in the center of your job and you have to manually move them to a corner. So just a top tip, make sure you do this part first. Now we can change this to be 48 inches. And the last thing we want to just double check is to make sure that we have our modeling resolution set to very high. And then we can go ahead and click OK. And there we have it all set up for us now to start to copy our components across our job space. Let's go back to our modeling tab for a second. So to do that, we're going to expand our base level here, and we are going to select the base, hold down our control key and select smooth and the copy of our visible model. And then we're going to use the array copy tool here to do all the work for us. So let's just click that. Now in this case, we are going to go ahead and make one row. And if you take 48 and divide it by 12, you're going to get 4. So we need 4 copies of this. We have the option of how we want our copies or our array to be spaced. We can either do the gap, which is in between our copies, or we can do an offset, which is this full distance. We're going to do that. And we're going to make this 12 inches, which is the total width of our part. We're going to make this 0. And then we're just going to go ahead and click copy. Then when everything's done, you'll see what we get in our 3D view. Now you'll notice that right off the bat, there's a bit of a problem. We have these raised areas in between the copies of the base. So let's go ahead and fix that by closing this down. And that's happening because we have all of these base components are being added together, and there happens to be a row of pixels that's overlapping. So let's just deselect everything, and we're going to hold down our shift key and select all of the blank bases. Right click on that, change the combine mode to merge, and we'll see that that fixes it up for us. Look straight back down on our job again, off click, and that looks pretty nice. Now we can take this piece of molding one step further if we'd like to, and maybe switch every second leaf and stem to the right, so we'll end up having it look a little bit more sort of interesting when you stand back and look at it. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to undo a few of the steps we just did. So Control Z on your keyboard twice, and then we're back to where we started from. Now, because we know we're going to have to go ahead and merge in our base component, we may as well just turn that to a merge component right away. Get that out of the way for us. And now what we want to do is to create a new version of what we see here, but not the base particularly. The base is just the same thing all the way across, so we can hide that. But we do want to take this and create a flipped version of it, or to create a solid version of it, so that if you chose to go back and create 2 different versions of this molding, you could still have this original version in the 2 parts, and then you could have one that has solid model, so that way you would, once we get done with our array copy, you'll have less components to deal with in your tree. Nice way to kind of keeping things nice and clean. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click over here in our component tree, and we're going to create a new level, and we're going to call this new level alternate array, and press enter. And then we are going to choose this option right here, which is create a component from the visible model. So we're going to create a brand new component on this level because it's selected. See, it's bold, of what we see in our composite model, which is both of these turned on. So we have our smooth base and our detail on top of that. So let's go ahead and click that. You'll see that now we have 2 copies sitting on top of each other. Let's just go ahead and turn off this one here and minimize that set of components. And there we have it all by itself. Now, what we can do is maximize our view, and we'll take a really close look at this and see what's going to happen. Let's turn back on our base again. And we're going to do this in 2 steps. Oh, you'll see that we have a bit of a problem here. We need to make sure that we turn this alternate array level on to be a merged level. And that way they merge in nicely like they should. Let's take the base first, and we're going to array copy it across. So we're going to go to our array copy tool. We're going to leave the settings exactly the way they are, and we can just go ahead and click copy. You can close that down and see everything fits together nice and smoothly because we turned that into a merge component. Now we have a look at using the array copy tool to copy our leaf and stem across. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to leave everything exactly the same, except for we're going to take a look at this symmetry option. Seeing as we're only copying across our model in 1 row, we only need to worry about these 2 bottom one. Pretend your XY0 spot is right here by the bottom left of this first little L. This shows you the symmetry, or what we're going to do with this component. And there's a few different options. If you click through them, you'll see what happens. We can just flip it left to right. We can flip it bottom to top. We can flip it left to right and bottom to top. But in our case, we just want to flip it left to right. Okay, and we're going to head and copy that. And we'll see what happens. Now we have every second one is being flipped. And that's exactly what we want in the end. And of course, like I mentioned, we have the original setup back here if we wanted to go ahead and recopy that across. But you'll see that we only have 4 copies of this component, not 8 copies like we had before. which again, kind of keeps everything nice and neat and tidy for you. And I think that's pretty good. Let's look back on that down again. Let's go ahead and tile our views, off click everything. And then let's think about maybe adding this to an arch instead. Okay, to do that, we're going to need a brand new level. So let's right click on top of alternate array and we're going to insert a new level. And then we're going to right click on that and we're going to rename that to be arch, A-R-C-H, and then press enter on our keyboard. Now what we want to do is we want to create a single model from what we can see in our composite model here, or what's in our 3D view. So to do that, again, we're going to choose to create a component from visible model. So we'll click that. And you'll see now we have a new component here, which is just the solid thing. Now we only want to see what we have here. So let's right click on the arch level. We're going to go down to show and we're going to say show only this. Everything else is now hidden and we can go ahead and minimize these levels that we don't want to see. And that's what we have. So that's one solid piece all together. Now we're going to need to go ahead and adjust our job setup to fit our new arch. So let's go to our drawing tab and do that by changing our job setup. And we are going to make our new job setup a width of 40 inches and a height of 20 inches. And everything else is going to stay the same. Nothing else changes. And then we can just go ahead and click OK. Now to start off, we're going to need to draw an arc to actually bend our molding around. So let's go over here to create an arc. Click that. And we are not going to use the through 3 points option. We're going to go ahead and try the center, start, and end. So let's click that. Now our start point is going to be at 6 and our Y value is going to be 1. And then our end point is going to be 34 and we are going to make this 1 and our radius is going to be set to 14 and then we can click create and we'll close that down. So what we've done is we actually just created the inside edge of our arch. And so it's a 14-inch radius. So the diameter of this full circle would be 28 inches. We also know that our molding is 4 inches tall. So it would have a total outside diameter of 36 inches. So we're going to add 4 inches here and 4 inches over here. And that's the height of our molding. So we want to distort our molding around this vector, but we want to minimize the part from being stretched and looking funny. So to do that, we are going to go ahead and adjust the size of our molding. So let's select that and we're going to go over here and choose to set selected object size. So again, we know that the outside diameter of our molding is going to be 36 inches. We know our molding is actually 4 inches high. And our inner diameter is 28 inches, but the median diameter in between the 36 and the 28 is going to be 32 inches. So if we go over here and we uncheck our link X and Y, we can work out the circumference of the circle that we're going to use with the formula pi times d. The diameter in this case is going to be 32. That's the median value, like we had mentioned a minute ago, between the 28 and the 36. But we only need half of that. So the formula would be pi times 32 divided by 2. And we can do that just by entering those numbers in here. So we're going to put in p for pi, asterisk for times, 32, and then we're going to put a /2. And then we can press equals on our keyboard, and our software will figure out the length that we need so that we can actually wrap this piece of molding around the outside edge of this arc that we made. And we can just click apply, and then we can close that down. Now you will notice that it did stretch it out just slightly, but it's not distorted all that bad, and it still looks really nice in the end. Now there's only one easy step left to do. We are going to hold down our shift key, and seeing as our molding component is already selected, we just need to select the actual arc that we made here, and we're going to use our distort selected objects. We'll click that and we're going to choose to distort above a single curve, and you'll see that we get a nice little green check mark here. That means that everything is okay, and we can click apply. Then we can close this down. Let's maximize our 3D view and off click that molding and have a look at that. And that looks really nice in the end. And what an easy way to create that molding. Now that completes this tutorial where we have looked at the various modeling tools to model the basic molding. We saw how to use the array tool to create a full 48-inch molding, and then we finished it off by distorting that component to the arc to create this wonderful arch.